Okay, you're just doing it. Got it. Perfect. So again, just to plug in on where we are at, the first series, Phoebe, if you take the next slide, or the first session, we focused on the theoretical background for anticipatory action and cash, and we said a little bit on both so that we were sure that our anticipation colleagues understood everything around cash, or at least some of it. And then we had the theory and the background on anticipatory action and really tried to plug in ways that we can use cash in anticipatory action. The second session last time, we worked with cash in early action protocols. And here we had examples from Kenya and from Bangladesh. I think that was very interesting to hear from those. And then today it's a DREF for imminent crisis, as I said. So I think that's it from me to start with. And then I'll hand it over to Phoebe to give us the background, everything on DREF. I think this is really important. This is really where we see new opportunities to use anticipatory action also without having that long-term early action protocol. So I really look forward to hearing more about it. And I'm sure that at least for those of us who are working with the cash side of things, we can see very clearly why our cash preparedness activities are very important in relation to this. So Phoebe, back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Maja, and colleagues. Again, we want to welcome you to our session today. So without any further ado, I will take you through what we will be describing today, quite a lot on the DREF for imminent crisis, or what we say DREF for anticipatory action. And Maja, you'll support me in timekeeping so that we keep it to the time. So maybe I'll just start with, again, just a quick reminder on anticipatory action and what that exactly means. If all of you remember what we described anticipatory action being in the very first session of this learning series, there was the time factor where the actions happen in anticipation of a hazard or an impact. We were looking at it being before the event happens, in anticipation of the event, or just before the impact of that hazard are actually felt. Then also there was a critical thing around action, and these actions are done to prevent or mitigate the full impact or any impact being felt by the communities, as well as also their livelihood, as well as their property. And then, of course, there was the prediction, or there's a predicted forecast or collaborative analysis that has been done. So looking at anticipatory action in general, there's the time element, there's the action that have to be done, either readiness, prepositioning, then of course the early action prior to the event making landfall. And then all this we have a projected forecast and or collaborative analysis. Then of course, I just want to share this, and I think I highlighted quite clearly in our first series. As the Red Cross Red Crescent, we are one of the things that we are focused on is to support the scaling up of anticipatory action. And this has been reflected in quite a number of documents that are both internal, as well as external in the various meetings that we are participating in. One of the most important documents is the Council of Delegate Resolution that focused on strengthening anticipatory humanitarian action in the movement. And one of the things that we agreed as our goal is to be one to increase commitments in the areas of strengthening the capacities, expanding the approach, as well as widening its application in order to overcome the current as well as the potential barriers to scaling up at the required pace. And of course, this led to us developing what we call the operational framework. And some of the goals and objectives or the vision statement for this operational framework to support this Council of Delegate Resolution was one, this operational framework had the vision that anticipatory action is implemented at scale so that we enable vulnerable people in at-risk communities to protect their lives as well as livelihood. So the element of implementing anticipatory action at scale was very well captured. And some of the objectives that we have under this operational framework, we have, of course, one, the scaling up, but also ensuring that anticipatory action is mainstreamed across disaster risk management, as well as the climate change adaptation processes, frameworks and plans that the National Society, the Federation, the ICRC, basically the movement is involved in. And then the second objective under this framework was to ensure that we have dedicated more funding to expand anticipatory action so that more people can receive assistance ahead of especially the predictable shocks. And that's why today we are discussing about the DREF for imminent crisis, but also I will briefly highlight to you the simple early action protocol, where we'll be having more briefings or more in-depth briefing on it at the first week of July. The third objective under this operational framework, we are also looking at expanding geographical coverage, including the type of shocks that can be anticipated. As you remember, initially when I was talking about the early action protocol, we started off with climate-related weather, climate-related hazards. But now we are looking to expand geographically, but also the type of shocks. So we are looking at also touching things like climate, health and diseases, among other things. Then, of course, the fourth objective, which is quite critical, especially when you talk about disaster preparedness, looking at achieving a system-wide shift towards anticipatory action, but doing it in a very coordinated manner rather than a siloed manner, which most of us are doing. And then in terms of the scope of this operational framework, of course, we are looking at the framework being applicable to all the movement components, and it's already supported in the planning. It's already supporting or planning to support the scale-up of anticipatory action. So it's not just for the Federation, we're also looking at having ICRC on board, the National Society on board, and also our reference centers on board with this framework. So in terms of the targets that have been set up under the operational framework by 2025, we are looking at around 80 national societies globally being engaged in anticipatory action, either through the early action protocols or contingency planning, or also through the DREF. Then we are also looking at 25% of the disaster relief emergency fund being allocated to anticipatory action. And we're going to see how this is actually being implemented in the coming slides. Then we are also looking at having around 4,000 staff, that is national society staff as well as volunteers, being trained on anticipatory action. And part of what we are doing is also that capacity building. Then, of course, we're also looking at about 4.3 million people being engaged or supported through anticipatory action. And of course, we have to look at different ways and different means on how we can support this. Then finally, in terms of the targets, we are looking at about 80 technical strategic thematic partnerships that would support the scaling up of anticipatory action within our national societies, of course, through different means. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Disaster Relief Emergency Fund, but probably your familiarity with it has been mostly around the response pillar. Just to inform you that currently the Disaster Relief Emergency Fund will be one fund, but it will be tackling two pillars, or it will be looking at two pillars. And the first pillar will be around the anticipatory action pillar, and this will look at supporting national societies via three main means. The first one is the early action protocol, which we have already discussed in previous sessions, where really the early action protocol will provide guaranteed or pre-agreed funding for readiness, pre-positioning of stocks, as well as early action activities. And just also inform you that recently the cap was increased from 350,000 CHF to 500,000 CHF, and each early action protocol will be valid for 5 years for weather as well as non-weather related hazards. So what I talked before, we are expanding the type of hazards that we're also focusing on. Secondly, we're looking at, under the anticipatory action pillar of the DREF, we're looking at the simple early action protocol, and we will talk about this, as I mentioned, in an upcoming webinar, which I'll also make mention to you. But through this simple early action protocol, we are looking to provide guaranteed pre-agreed funding for readiness activity, pre-stocking, as well as early action activities. And the cap for this in terms of support from this fund will be CHF 200,000, looking at targeting 2,000 people over 2 years for weather and non-weather related hazards. Then the third approach on how we are going to support national society for the anticipatory pillar of the DREF is through the DREF allocation for imminent crisis, which will be our major focus today. And here we can look at things such as readiness, as well as prepositioning of stocks, as well as early action for imminent hazards, which are on the horizon. The Met has said that we're expecting 75 millimeters in 24 hours in the coming week. You can actually utilize this tool. For example, you're expecting conflicts to spark because of elections, you can actually come and utilize this fund in anticipatory of those events. The funding is not pre-agreed for the draft allocation for the imminent crisis, and therefore a national society must submit an operational plan and budget to access this funding, but we'll discuss it in detail in the next coming. Then, of course, we have the response pillar, which most of you have actually taken advantage of to support them in the disaster response intervention. So this is just a diagrammatic explanation of what I've talked about. We are looking at the disaster for relief emergency fund having two main pillars. The anticipatory pillar that would be supported by the focus-based action by the DREF, and then of course you have the usual DREF. But at the end of the day, we are looking at this funding supporting preparedness through either the early action protocol development, funding of readiness and prepositioning. Then when the trigger is reached, anticipatory action takes place, either again through the early action protocol, through the early action component. Then we're also having the DREF for imminent crisis. Then I've also mentioned about the simple early action protocol. Then of course we have the getting into the response and recovery either through the DREF or the emergency plan of action that most of you are familiar with. So again, a very brief reminder of the early action protocol for those who are not there in our initial meeting. It's eligible to only national society who have prepared early action protocols. The cap for this is 500,000. We are looking at targeting 10,000 people. It's supporting readiness activities, repositioning, as well as early action. It has a lifespan of 5 years. In Africa so far, we have 9 early action protocols that have been approved. 3 early action protocols, that is Mozambique flood, cyclone, and then Niger drought that have been triggered. And then of course, for the early action protocol, we are looking at both weather and non-weather related hazards. So things like floods, typhoons, cold waves, heat waves, name them. Then looking at the simple early action protocol, just again in brief, because as I mentioned, we'll have a more detailed webinar later on. We're looking at the budget cap of 200,000 people. The target is 2,000 people. It will have a lifespan of 2 years. Then it will also support readiness activities, prepositioning activities, and early action. And any national society can apply for this pre-agreed anticipatory action funding. It is not only for extreme events, it covers other weather and non-weather related hazards. And really, we are looking at it being a very simplified plan, which can be developed into a more independent manner should the national society be interested. But most important is that the national society should be able to work within its capacity. And as I mentioned, we are having a briefing session for this on simple early action protocol on the 5th of July 2022 from 3 p.m. to 4:30 East African time. We are looking at providing both English and French languages for this webinar, and the location will be on Zoom, and a calendar invite has already been circulated. If you have not received this calendar invite, just on the chat box, please drop in your what is it called, email address, and I will share more details with you. I have 4 minutes to go, so I'll just quickly go to the DREF for imminent crisis. And here, as I mentioned before, our budget cap is 150,000, and we are looking at the duration for this being 1 month for the sudden onset hazards to about 4 months for the slow onset hazards. And again, any national society is eligible to apply for this. It covers both weather and non-weather related hazards. And then we can have, it's pretty much the same application as the response DREF. So anybody who has been able to do the DREF, you know the drill. You need to produce your operational plan as well as the budget. So we'll expect the same for you. You give us an operational plan of the activities that you'll be doing, as well as the budget. And here you can include activities related to readiness, stock prepositioning, as well as early action. And then also you can also already include some bit of activities related to response. It's not a pre-agreed funding, like for example, the simple early action protocol, as well as the full early action protocol. And then of course, we are looking at it promoting, so acting ahead of the event, and also implementing early actions as well as early response. I just want to quickly go in terms of some of the eligible activities, because I have 2 minutes. So looking at the readiness activities, as I mentioned, prepositioning and trigger based. So readiness activities can include such things as refresher training for volunteers, initial planning and coordination meetings, assessment planning, prepositioning of stock, pre-agreement with financial service providers, You can also do things such as assessment, the pre-disaster assessment of the capacity, looking at what you can preposition in terms of early action. These can be selected items, but they have to be justified. We cannot, of course, preposition items that have a shorter shelf life. And as we discussed last week, also this can be accompanied with supporting early warning, including activation of community early warning procedures, evacuation of people at risk, as well as preparation of shelters, which also has a crash component to it. Also, activities eligible include communication, and then of course there's monitoring and evaluation. Some of the activities that are not eligible, of course, costs related to the contingency planning, preparedness or response for annually recurring events, for example, season of flooding, then any costs or activities that have already been budgeted for under ongoing or annual programming, looking at rehabilitation and recovery activities, among other things such as purchase of assets of vehicles. But one thing that I have to mention is that when you're looking at the DREF for imminent crisis, one of the things that we are trying to encourage national societies to have is a contingency plan, because that then creates a very good basis for you to be able to identify what readiness activities you want to do, what prepositioning activities you want to do, what, for example, early actions you want to do. But my colleague Daniel will be giving that in more detail in the next session. I think I'll stop at that. I will not go through these slides, but these slides will be shared for you to be able to actually, go through them in depth. I'll stop at that, Maja. Back to you.
Very sorry, I was just lost for a couple of minutes there on my connection. Did you say anything about the slide or?
Not yet. So I was handing over to you and Daniel on this.
Yeah, I can't see Daniel. Daniel, are you here? Mutinda, are you with us? I think maybe we've lost him, but we also know he's on a Juba connection. So we just mentioned that it's important to start looking at putting cash into your contingency plans if you haven't already at the national society level, because that's really what also enables that you can use cash in whatever multi-sector response you're setting up. And it's not like it's different from other response modalities. Again, and I think we've reiterated this throughout the session, that cash is a tool. Cash is just one response modality you have in your toolbox, but it's really important that it's reflected in the contingency plan, and that contingency plan is also then pushing a little bit on some of the specific preparedness and readiness actions that needs to be there. So I'll not talk too much about this. It relates to those national societies that are doing already cash preparedness. It relates, of course, to looking into our feasibility assessments and pre-identifying who can access cash, maybe also who can't, and what would be the response modality if they cannot access cash. When would people need support and so on. So this contingency planning thinking is really along the same lines of the kind of contingency plan you have in place already. If you don't have a contingency plan in place, you definitely should have it if you want to do any early actions like anticipatory action activities, of course. So I think with that, the idea was to do quite a quick case study with you. So Phoebe, I think you still own the slides if you can move forward. So we're just going to present it, and then we have 4 breakout rooms, so 2 in French and 2 in English. So French speaking colleagues will be going in and speaking without interpretation. So we're looking at Monisia. It's a fictive country, of course, but we wanted it to be just a random place that everyone could then relate to. And we are looking down a timeline of floods soon to come in Monisia. So I've set up a short timeline. Again, Phoebe, if you can change to the next. On the activities here. So these slides, you'll have them in the breakout rooms as well, in French and English to discuss. So we have the 15th of May, again random, we have a regional forecast, and National Society starts to monitor a situation because there's a lot of rain coming. A month after, the national forecast is confirming that there is likely to be a peak and they can already see which of the regions in Indonesia is more impacted. And shortly after that, the National Society has been allocated a DREF for 3 months of 150,000 CHF for readiness and early actions. So this is where we're reaching trigger 1, where readiness activities can commence, and they have 45 days to implement these readiness activities. Of course, these are very rough timelines. They might change. So by the end of that period, the readiness activities are completed. And as they see the flooding come closer, trigger 2 is reached, and the National Society starts their early actions. And then we have, at the end of that, trigger 3 is reached, and the National Society starts response activities. And for this case, they're needing another DREF or a second DREF allocation so that they can support people through this. What we want in the case study, Phoebe, if you can skip 2, because I think the next is in French. Yes, and the next. Oh yeah, sorry. So just a few words on the National Society capacity. They have a contingency plan in place. So National Society has a contingency plan in place, which serves as a basis for their DREF, imminent crisis DREF. They also have cash-trained staff and volunteers. I don't know if you remember in the very beginning, we said it was really important that this capacity was spread out because you don't necessarily know exactly where a potential crisis will hit in a country. Again, something to be reflected back in the contingency plans. The National Society Indonesia has a financial service provider framework agreement in place that can be activated, but they've never used it before for anticipatory action. And there's a high preference in National Society, including at the leadership level, to use unrestricted cash assistance. And the National Society has the cash embedded in that contingency plan as well. So now the next, Phoebe, in English. Yeah, so what we wanted to do in the groups is split out. We'll have 2 groups that are focusing on readiness tasks, and we'll have 2 groups that are focusing on the early action activities. The response will leave because that's what we're all used to. So what we need is to get into that thinking of the readiness and the early action activities. In the reminder that I sent today, I did send the link to the slide deck that we've used before. I'll just grab it again so that you can go in and actually use that in your breakout rooms specifically. Sorry, I should have done this before. It's coming right up. So do click that before you go into the group, because it's a different chat box that you will have. And then for now, I will leave it to you to join the group that you have an interest in. So here's the Google Drive link in the chat. So I've put the breakout groups. So they're called Readiness English, Readiness French, Early Action English, Early Action French. And for the French, we have Joshua. She will be leading the readiness group. And we have Dennis leading the early action group, our dear colleagues from IFRC in Cameroon and Madagascar, respectively. Thank you very much to both of you. And then Phoebe will be leading the readiness in English, and I'll come in on the early actions in English. But maybe, Anita, since I see you're here and I'm trying to manage the breakout rooms, could I ask that you jump into that room with me and help facilitate that? That would be much appreciated, because we missed one person. All right, so I hope everyone is clear with that. And Phoebe, I lost my right to do the breakout rooms because
okay, sure. I can open the rooms, no problem. They have just been open.
Okay, so the rooms are open. Yeah, so please join. You can press join breakout room. You get the list. Please join readiness English, readiness French, early action English, early action French, depending on your language. And if you're not joining them, Phoebe, if you give me the host rights, I can assign people if they're not
Okay,
joining a
sure, no
room
problem.
already. So Anita, if you can join the early action English and help facilitate that, because I'll be opening and closing and stuff. Thank you. I think we could start with the Phoebe's group on the readiness. If we want to follow a little bit the curve, I don't know from that group who is presenting. Phoebe, is that you or someone else?
Sorry, I think Olache, do you want to present for us just for tonal variation? And to hear at least a male voice. I can just project my screen for you, no problem.
Okay, that will be fine, Phoebe.
Go ahead.
Okay, I can proceed, right?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right, so thank you very much for the preparedness or readiness group. I think it was a great time for us engaging and then discussing around activities that could be done, suggested activities in readiness for the tax of cash. Part of the suggestions were: one, installation of early warning system or systems. We also looked at beneficiary selection and communication for cash transfers, where individuals as well as the cash group will be engaged or involved in this activity. Then we looked at identification of evacuation centers. So when the disaster comes, where will be used for evacuation, identification of safer routes, like the parts that are safe, either for evacuation or for the activities that will be done. We consider training of volunteers and communities on cash transfers and the modalities. Why we are training the communities as well is to have them on same page with whatever we're going to do, and to also have them communicate same to the members of the communities or the affected population. We look at stocking of equipment to support the cash process. Here we are looking at equipment that will be used, for instance, the tablets that will be used either for the various processes of the cash, and some other equipment that will need to be involved in the process. Then we looked at activities like the creation of dikes to divert water, and this will be done basically by engaging the Cash for Work scheme, where the communities will probably get involved in doing this, and at the end of the day, get encashed for doing the work. Then we look at procurement or activation of financial service providers. This is in a situation where if financial service providers are not procured already, then the process of procurement can be initiated. But if there is a procurement already, then of course we can activate the service providers and have them ready for cash. The market assessment is one of the readiness activities. Procurement of personal protective equipment, PPE, and then the repositioning of stocks to the field. We're trying to get more details on the repositioning of stocks to the field, but of course, it's one of the activities that was listed. Then why trying to have these activities fit into our 45 days timeline? Phoebe, can we have the next slide now? Okay, so this was the point we were before we got cut off by the breakout room time. So in putting this by timeline, we said installation of early warning systems could come from day 45 to day 40. That would be like 4 days of activities. And then the risk communication, all of this can be done from day 45 to day 40, which is basically like 5 days activities. And because procurement processes usually take long, we suggested that procurement and activation of financial service provider could start as early as the first day and run throughout the 45 days timeline, depending on how long the procurement process would take. So we said day 45 to day 0, the procurement and activation will take place. Identification of evacuation centers and safer routes includes, including communicating this with the community through Cash for Work scheme, would take place from day 40 to day 43, day 33, which is about 7 days, if I'm right. This can happen concurrently with stocking of equipment to support cash process. That is the equipment that are needed, like the tablets and the others. That can happen concurrently with the identification of evacuation and safer routes. So you can see day 40 to day 33 for both of them. Then we have the training of volunteers and community on cash transfer modalities. This we feel is very important, since the volunteers are also going to be supporting in the market assessment, in the creation of diets by the community using the cash for work scheme. So training of volunteers and the community will come in the 33 to the 30. And then that will be 3 days of activities. Then the market assessment would happen from the 30 to the 27. So the volunteers are trained now. They can support the market assessment from the 30 to the 27, which is 3 days of activities. Then we are looking at cash for work to create diets. That can happen from day 33. So that is running concurrently with the training of volunteers. So it starts from the same day the training is starting and then runs up to the 13. That will be like how many days of activity? I'm not very sure. And then we have beneficiary selection and communication of cash transfers. Then the other activities there, which time didn't allow us to actually bring out in time according to our timeline. Then for the challenges, we're not able to go into it, so we look forward to maybe discussing that here at the larger house. Thank you very much, and I appreciate my team members. It was quite an interactive section for us. Thank you very much. Over from here.
Thank you so much. Phoebe, or anyone from that same team wants to add anything?
Yeah, colleagues who are in the readiness team, Frederick, Lisa, I can't remember all of them, but any compliments to what Olache has mentioned? There was also Dauda. You can just unmute and add. If not, I think we can go ahead, Maja.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I maybe just want to.
Eugene, I think I see Eugene hand up. I'm not sure if
Yeah,
comment.
Thank you so much. I wanted actually to add something, maybe like 2 points for readiness. One actually is about again having the standard operation procedures in place. Then also I think also mapping other stakeholders who can support. You never know how the disaster gravity will be. Maybe it's also one of the readiness is having standard operation procedures, cash standard operation procedures, and mapping even other stakeholders that can work with. Thank you.
Yes, very, very good addition. Thank you for that, Eugene. And I think maybe also just to highlight the FSPs, the financial service provider, if there isn't already a contract in place, this can be quite lengthy. So that's definitely something that I would move to a cash preparedness stage and not necessarily a readiness stage. So if you're a national society or supporting a national society that's even thinking about doing cash and anticipatory action, start now, contact us, reach out, and we can get that financial service provider procurement up and running. But maybe very much also the point that I tried to make in the case itself, and I know we didn't have so much time, sorry about that, was that the financial service provider doesn't necessarily understand anticipatory action. So include them in the training, in the awareness raising and everything, because they might not understand what is it actually that we are trying at here. And we maybe also need to have some agreement with them what actually happens if we're not triggering the early actions that come later. So we might have the cash for work still being distributed through the FSP, but we might also just have registered a number of people with them as our pre-registered beneficiaries, or at least have made an agreement on how to do that quickly, and then not activating. So there are some details there that we really need to think about, because the financial service providers are private sector actors, so they don't necessarily think the same way that we do. They're not here in our learning sessions, but you can have those conversations with them at the country level. I suggest that we take the French early action group first. So for those of you who don't understand French, please go to the interpretation at the bottom, the little globe, and pick your language and you will get it translated. So Dennis or Joshua, would someone from your group be ready to present?
Yes, Maja, in French now.
Yes, go ahead in French.
Yeah, ok. Merci beaucoup, collègues. On devait faire sur les actions de préparation et aussi les actions précoces, mais le temps ne nous a pas permis de le faire. Je vais essayer de partager mon écran. Voilà, vous me dites si vous voyez mon écran.
Oui.
D'accord. Et là, on a parlé très brièvement sur les actions, les activités de préparation. On a dit que déjà, on a formé les volontaires, on les a équipés, on a fait les contrats avec les prestataires financiers, on a mis en place les équipes de community engagement au niveau communautaire, on a mis en place aussi une équipe au niveau national de coordination des activités. Donc, je vais maintenant passer la parole à mon collègue Umaru, qui va nous amener sur les actions précoces. Et c'est là où nous avons fait une discussion un peu détaillée. Et après, vous allez aussi nous appuyer ou alors s'il y a des éclaircissements que vous voulez, vous allez nous faire signe. La parole à toi, Umaru.
Merci Denis, sinon c'était Suleiman, on s'était convenu, c'est Konaté.
Ah, c'est Suleiman.
Ouais, Suleiman, c'est là.
Oui, je suis là,
vraiment.
Vas-y,
je ne vais pas marcher sur ta langue.
Ok, merci bien Omaro, merci. Bonjour à tout le monde. Moi, c'est Konaté Suleiman. Le point focal est bien au niveau du Mali. Ok, comme Denis vient de le dire, justement, après les phases préparatoires, nous nous sommes dit que pour ce qui concerne la phase d'action précoce, nous devrions commencer par l'information et sensibilisation au niveau communautaire. Donc, cette activité, nous devrons mener dans 2 jours normalement. Danis, le diapo est parti, voilà. Donc, nous devons réaliser ça dans 1 ou 2 jours. L'idée, c'est vraiment sensibiliser la communauté sur l'utilisation des cash que nous allons faire et surtout les choses essentielles qu'on devrait acheter avec. Ensuite, viendra la phase de coordination avec les autres acteurs, parce que si nous devons intervenir, il faut qu'on sache aussi qui doit faire quoi, surtout avec les autres parties prenantes, notamment avec les services techniques de l'État. Ensuite, nous allons entamer l'évaluation des besoins. À ce niveau, il s'agit de voir un peu quelle est la valeur de l'enveloppe qu'il faut attribuer à chaque ménage. Donc, ça, c'est vraiment le panier minimum qu'il faut discuter à ce niveau. Cette activité qui va nous prendre un peu 3 à 4 jours comme ça. Et après cette activité, nous allons procéder à l'identification et l'enregistrement des bénéficiaires. Donc, ça, c'est vraiment nécessaire en fonction du nombre de bénéficiaires que le PAP pourrait prendre si ce nombre est atteint ou pas. En tout cas, quels sont les bénéficiaires qu'on devrait enrôler dans le système de distribution. Ensuite, sera l'enquête du marché, l'évaluation, en tout cas les fournisseurs et les commerçants que nous devrons vraiment mettre à la disposition des communautés avec quels éléments des communautés pourront accéder à leur niveau. C'est vrai, une partie de cette activité devrait avoir lieu dans la phase préparation, voilà, notamment les ciblages même au niveau de ces prestataires, mais dans les actions précoces aussi, dans ces délais de 15 jours, nous devrons communiquer, faire l'enquête auprès de ces commerçants pour voir les stocks qu'ils ont à leur niveau. Et après ça, c'est vraiment la phase de communication avec les prestataires financiers pour organiser le plan de distribution du cash. Là, on va fournir toutes les informations nécessaires aux bénéficiaires, à ces prestataires financiers pour que la distribution de cash puisse être effectuée en bon échange. Et après, c'est la distribution du cash proprement dite pour les besoins de base. Donc, ça, c'est une activité que nous allons faire probablement dans 4 jours. Et après ça, c'est la phase de rapportage et des leçons apprises. Il y a une partie du diapo qui est masquée, Danis, si vous pouvez cliquer sur le diapo. Il y a une caption sur l'écran. La partie défi est masquée, justement. Je ne sais pas si on voit la même chose que toi.
Oui, c'est la même chose. On a 2 défis. On a discuté. Le temps ne nous a pas permis de continuer, mais on avait déjà identifié 2 défis.
Oui.
Le premier défi qui concerne l'accès aux lieux inondés. Donc, dans 15 jours, il y a les endroits qui sont encore plus inondés et il est très difficile d'accéder aux communautés qui restent dans les milieux inondés et les amener dans les milieux sécurisés, comme on dit. Et puis, on a aussi parlé de la coordination avec d'autres intervenants. Les premiers 15 jours, c'est les jours où tout le monde est un peu désordonné parce que la situation n'est pas encore claire. Et là, la coordination, on a trouvé que c'est un peu compliqué pour surtout la coordination externe avec les autres intervenants, que c'est un peu compliqué. Mais on trouve toujours les solutions à ces défis en renforçant la coordination et en renforçant les équipes de volontaires pour arriver dans les endroits difficiles à accéder.
Merci beaucoup. Juste cette partie est masquée sur notre écran ici. Je pense qu'on ne voit pas ton écran projeté, mais plutôt l'écran de base.
Ah, d'accord.
Oui, c'est ça.
Je ne sais pas là où se trouve l'erreur, alors.
Oui, oui.
Bon, je vais même...
Peut-être sur Got It.
En fait, c'était même fini, hein? C'était déjà fini.
Oui.
Ouais.
OK.
Donc, je vous remercie. Si les collègues ont d'autres choses à ajouter, ils seront les bienvenus.
Voilà, merci Suleiman, merci Denis pour cet encadrement de groupe. Je crois bien qu'il y a un défi qui m'est venu en tête après. Il y a l'histoire de l'inflation. Souvent, quand on fait du cash, on injecte une quantité importante de la liquidité, ça crée la hausse du prix au marché environnement. Ça, c'est vraiment un défi qu'il faut prendre en compte. Hein, parce que souvent, on a vu, l'expérience nous a montré, malgré toutes les études du marché de faisabilité, souvent quand on injecte la liquidité, on rencontre toujours une hausse des prix. Merci.
Merci.
Thank you so much to the French Early Action Group. I maybe think that a few of the activities that you put in on the early action were also things that are maybe more readiness, but where we could use the early action period to verify these. So for example, the needs assessment, that more in-depth needs assessment is not necessarily something we can do when we are this close to responding, and also pre-registration of beneficiaries. But I would definitely put in the verification of the beneficiaries and the vulnerability criteria. I would put in a re-verification on the market assessment, but just really to highlight that some of these activities might be readiness, and it really shows that we need to balance where are we planning things and that we are realistic in our timelines. I think let's hear from the last group, because I think they also have some good options for the early actions. Anita or someone else in the team, we'd love to hear from you, and then we can take a few minutes for challenges after that and discuss those more in depth. I think definitely the one with inflation I would have a comment on. English.
Yeah. Any volunteers? Any volunteers from my group? People were suspiciously quiet in the chat. Can you
then go ahead? They can add in, yeah.
Yeah. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah.
You can see it. Yeah. It's not full screen yet, is it?
No.
No. How's that?
Yeah. Yeah, now we have your presenter mode. I don't know why it does that.
And
You probably need to reshare your screen.
And okay, so we had 4 really great examples. Let me try just once more quickly to share again. Is it this one maybe? Okay, if this doesn't work, I'll just leave it in that mode. I'm really bad with PowerPoint. How's that? Is it full screen now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, lovely. So we had 4 really great examples. And the first one was really interesting. We had cash for work to clear drains, bushes, and rehabilitate dikes. And this one is actually based in reality and based in a real EAP. And the colleague in the call can explain more if you're interested in a minute. And basically within those 3 or 4 days even, their readiness activities and their preparedness activities mean that they already have agreements in place with the government who provide like the machinery and general oversight. It's part of a existing government program, which I really love. And the community provide the manpower, if I understood correctly. And yeah, so they roll out a suite of early actions which help to mitigate the impacts, because as you know, like drains get blocked all the time, bushes kind of roll and block bunds and drainage, and dikes are collapsing. And so this is kind of like a part of, I would guess, ongoing annual kind of like work. But in case these drains aren't cleared and the dikes aren't strong enough, then at least this early action is rolled out ahead of a forecasted drought to hopefully kind of like ward off the impact of the floods. So this was really interesting. And obviously the cash for work was to kind of like roll out the manpower to help support the government. Some quite big machinery required there. So again, really relying on the government to provide that heavy machinery, trucks and so on. The second one, which was really interesting too, was cash for work to evacuate livestock, like recognizing the fact that we've seen in many countries, I'm thinking Bangladesh, for example, that people will stay until the last minute with their livestock, and you're trying to evacuate them and they won't go without their animals, of course, because they're one of their main livelihood assets. So when we say cash for work to evacuate livestock, actually we mean live people and their livestock. So the cash for work is basically to cover communities and pre-defined list of workers. So the workers are already agreed beforehand, the salaries, the conditions upon which they're employed, the activities that they have to do. So for example, loading or offloading people and their animals onto trucks. So that was a really interesting one. And then another colleague mentioned once people are at the evacuation site, they need animal feed. So this could be cash or unconditional cash to buy animal feed at the evacuation sites. And this I could foresee as being quite tricky as being able to do within the 15-day lead time, really depending on, if you have financial service providers in place, if the traders providing the animal feed, are they evacuated with you? Well, that could be a nice early action to evacuate the market traders supplying animal feed, right? You make sure you evacuate their animal feed as well. And so if it's unconditional cash, of course, you have to make sure, that people can access their cash. Can they use mobile money in conditions of floods? Are they able to cash out in the area where the evacuation site is? If all of this doesn't look feasible within 15 days, then you might just be looking at like either vouchers or just providing the animal feed. But then you have to make sure that that is on standby and guaranteed that you can provide that in this situation. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky, I would say, this second one. Then we had 2 more good examples. We had cash for work for early harvesting of fish and crops. So recognizing, in flood and cyclones, people lose everything and then they have to start all over again, and they don't have time to go out and harvest their crops and at least, you know, get some cash for it before a flood or cyclone or drought or whatever hits. So cash for work again is paying workers, you know, having a standby list of workers who know exactly, you know, how to harvest properly, where the harvest will be stored, you know, all these mechanisms around the harvest are ready and in place to roll out and done very, very quickly in order to at least guarantee those farmers some kind of source of income before the hazard hits. We already mentioned it, but I love this one. This is also another Philippines example, cash for work to evacuate market traders, like recognizing that in some highly flood prone areas, you have very low income market traders who lose everything every time there's a flood. And those market traders supply critical items to communities, so critical food and non-food items. And the idea is that these traders, you know, literally cash for work is given to the workers, again, to load, to help dismantle the market stall, to load it onto the trucks and to offload it again at the other end. We have a whole series of instructions on how that should be done, so it's clear for everybody, and so that action can be rolled out very quickly. I think maybe Maja can tell you more if you want to know more about that. And I think a lot of these you can also read about on the Anticipation Hub. And the last thing just to say is, we had some very smart cookies as well in our session, and they recognized, you know, that there's many other things that need to be done, like after that initial early action. So, you know, the people are sitting in the evacuation site, for example, and they still have needs. So what happens then? And they were already thinking about, you know, what should we be doing then? And we had some suggestions that are listed below on actions that could take place. And I think that's like, it links in nicely with what Maja and Phoebe were saying earlier about having a contingency plan in place, because then you need to know what to do next, right? And then if you have that in your contingency plan and it's agreed, then it's much easier and faster to roll out those actions. You know, once the flood has hit its peak and people can't go back to their homes for a few weeks, you've already implemented your early action. Then what? That can be in your contingency plan. So I think that's everything. And I don't know, anybody else want to clarify? Did I explain? If I explained something wrong, please let me know or add to it.
No, thank you so much. Yes. I was just thinking of the other things that we think of giving the unconditional cash to buy animal feeds, animal vaccination, dips, and all those. Because in the time when the people move, especially in the floods or whatever it is, they would need those vaccination or medications for their animals. And also animals are prone to diseases during that time. And also to consider issues of destocking depending on what is the situation, to encourage the beneficiaries to start destocking to reduce their animal stocks. From, I think it's Maja who shared something around that. When you're looking at the markets, look at the best options so that at least communities can cash in than selling at a loss or losing their animal to diseases or to whatever other challenges. Over, thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. Anyone else from that team?
Yeah. Yes, yeah, I was thinking also it's good. There are some other cross-cutting issues, maybe like maybe psychosocial support. People who have lost the animals, they're also having another thing. Psychosocial support, also engaging the animal, can I say animal doctors or veterinaries, so that also can be involved, and also involving other stakeholders according to the SOPs, the standard operation procedures, to other stakeholders, not only the government, but the other stakeholders that can, key stakeholders that can be supporting in this action.
Yeah.
I love that, yeah. Eugene. I love that. And maybe just the last word, Maja, is, I mean, that is like in countries where we've been working on anticipation for a while, like the idea is we roll out a suite of early actions in harmony with other actors. So just to give you an example, you know, in Bangladesh, in the evacuation sites, UNFPA are really looking into the special vulnerabilities of, you know, women and children, and they're looking at the special needs of women in particular, and pregnant women, and then so different actors would take care of different needs of the population. So and I really like the way that you're thinking that, you know, there are many needs, and what we need to do is just be clear on what we can do, and if we still think that, you know, animals will need to be vaccinated very soon after being evacuated and they'll need veterinary care, that's kind of really where you can also start reaching out to other actors and see if they would like to kind of cooperate and act upon the same triggers and thresholds, and make a plan to complement your plan. It doesn't necessarily have to be the National Society that does it, but it can be done in cooperation with others.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And it sounds as if you've all had some really good discussions in the groups. And I'm sorry that we're always running short on time. I think maybe a key learning for us is just to plan a little bit longer, so we have time for the discussions, but we also realize that everyone is always very busy. I think what I'm taking away from the session today is, of course, that we all need to go back and do a bit more homework. And I don't think that's just for you sitting on your side of the screen. It's also for myself, for Phoebe and Anita and all of us who claim that, or almost claim that we should be the experts to help on this. I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve the processes. We do see an increased uptake of this imminent crisis DREF. We do see the simplified EAPs, early action protocols, now coming in as another opportunity. So I think we can really expect to see the anticipatory action field just grow and boom. And as the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, we do have really unique opportunities for being part of the movement that is growing this. We are there on the ground and able to deliver fast. And if some of you remember, in the very first session, I showed a map of how many African national societies we have that are engaging in cash preparedness, and it's a lot. Like, we are really far in that. So even going in and starting to link the cash and anticipatory action, I think is a really good opportunity. But we might need to rethink, what do we fit into those boxes? What is readiness? What is early action? What is the actual response? Because somehow we are still mixing them a bit. And I think in the process of thinking through this and developing our contingency plans, our DREF operational plan and so on, we might also need to talk to those that are approving it to say, well, if we want to do cash here, maybe we need to do it a little bit earlier than if we were giving people food, because they need that time to spend it. Or maybe we need to rethink what we're doing over here, or we need to rethink that collaboration and so on. So I think we are all still at a learning stage, and I really appreciate all the inputs that we've had throughout the learning sessions, both from the different practitioners and facilitators and presenters that we've had, but also from all of you who are here and who followed the session. I will compile the whole slide deck, so for sessions 1, 2, and 3, and share that. So Phoebe, Anita, and Dennis, please also share your discussion points from today, so I can add that in to that slide deck. We'll upload the last of the recordings. The other 2 are on YouTube. I haven't figured out how to actually get the French translation that we've had live here, so I'm not sure that that's a possibility, and I'm very sorry about that. We remain available, Phoebe, myself, the Anticipation Hub, various other actors, for more learning on this. I think just quickly to share, I wanted to just remind you that we do have a few different areas to plug into and keep up the learning that we have on this. So first of all, if you want to know more about anticipatory action, there's an Africa Dialogue platform from the 28th to the 30th of June, where you can join online if you're not someone who has registered to join in person. We can share the link to this in the email where we are sending out the resources. There are technical working groups at sub-regional level working on anticipatory action, those would be Phoebe and her team. So if you're someone who is not already in it and would like to be, do again reach out and we will find a way to get you looped in. And then we have the sub-regional cash communities of practice. So right now we have 5 that are functioning. We have actually a few of our facilitators from these in here in the group of participants. I would think that having anticipatory action national society members also join in and have a conversation in the community of practice for the cash focal points would also be a really good opportunity to see how can we continue developing this, how can we share ideas with each other, how can we co-design and really pick up on the peer learning that all of us are promoting now. I also see a very long link for the anticipatory or the Africa Dialogue platform, sorry, in the chat now from Phoebe. And then Phoebe, do you want to say a few words here at the end before we close for this last session?
Just to say, first of all, a very big thank you to you colleagues for joining this learning session. It was good to have you here. You actually made it what it's supposed to be. You can imagine if it was just Maya and myself and Anita, it would be terrible. But thank you so much for finding the time to join. We look forward to collaborating more with you as a national society. As I indicated initially, we are working to scale up anticipatory action, and this is just one of the means of the ways. So again, to invite you to the 5th Dialogue platform, I'm looking forward to seeing you there so that we can discuss more on cash and how we can work with it around anticipatory action. So thank you so much, and back to you, Maya.
Thank you so much, Phoebe, and thank you for all your hard work in preparing this. It's been excellent. I came from the cash side and said, let's do this, and you gave us all your time, so really appreciate that. Just to say, when I'm sharing this slide deck, these small pictures that are in here at the end are all links into the resources where you can go in and study more on both forecast-based action and on the anticipation hub and on the cash side of everything, of course. But do reach out. We'll probably send a tiny poll. We wanted to do it within this meeting, but I think it was better to have the discussions. So we'll share 3 questions for you. If you have any direct feedback, do also send that back to us. We'd love to hear from you whether this was a good learning modality. And we'd love to hear what could be the next, what is the next step for you to be able to do cash and anticipatory action. That's it, over, and thank you everyone for coming and joining us here in this and the last 2 sessions we had as well.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and have a nice
Can I get? Thank you, everybody. Phoebe, can I catch up with you after?